Empower Talk with Dr. We are criminal to time tag all of you to all around America, all around the nation. So again, we thank you for being with us on tonight. And if you're on YouTube, same thing. Share that with all of your contacts, all of your friends, because this is information that it's not only informational, but it's transformational. It's transformational in the way that we're going to be voting. It's transformational in the way that we'll be doing things when it comes to the outcome of what's going to happen. So make sure you share this with all of your contacts. And again, we thank you for being with us on tonight. Thank you for being with us for Empower Talk. Go ahead and share that. And what's going to happen now is we are going to begin our actual countdown. And during that countdown, you'll have time to share. Tell all your friends to come on, get on the screen, get on the phone, tell them, text them, do whatever you have to do. But get them here right now to be in this virtual atmosphere so that we can learn and we can listen, and then we can go out to transform and inspire and inform others about what we learned here on this evening. So we're going to have our countdown, and we'll be right back shortly as we begin Empower Talk with Dr. James Dixon. Don't you turn that dial, but make sure everyone tunes in.
you to this Empower Talk session, a special edition of Empower Talk. My name is Dr. James Dixon. We bring you greetings from Houston, Texas. We're grateful that you've joined us, and we appreciate those of you who are giving a little time to this very, very important conversation. Empower Talk Live is all about, now that you know, what will you do? Because we inform people in order to ignite people to make a change in your community and in our broader society. We're honored to have you today, along with those who are in our live audience, and we're grateful for all of us coming together, because if there was ever a time that we needed to come together to make a collective contribution to our own destiny, that time is right now. So give yourselves a hand for joining Empower Talk Live on this very special occasion. We're excited that you are with us on this evening. We appreciate you so very much. Thank you, those of you tuning in on Facebook. We appreciate you. Those of you who are joining us by YouTube, we thank you. We're grateful for those in cities and states across the nation being a part of the conversation. Now, you do want to not be selfish. Be sure and tag your friends, text somebody and tell them we're on live for Empower Talk. And we've got an amazing conversation that's going to take place here this evening, featuring three amazing women who are doing a stellar job as soldiers on the battlefield. These women, yes, they are absolutely beautiful, but they are bold. They are absolutely good to look at, but I'm going to tell you, don't get in their way. They will absolutely make a difference. They demand change, and they're using their woman power to make great things happen. Let's give woman power a big hand. You ought to do better than that. Let's give woman power a big hand. We appreciate that, and the power of women. There's a history with that, even in the scripture. So I'm so excited. We bring you greetings from Houston, Texas, and we're grateful for your presence on this evening. Let's just jump right into this. We're talking about a very sensitive and yet necessary subject, and that is human trafficking and sexual exploitation. We've got experts here to give us some information and some insight. You're going to be informed, and I want to say to you, things that you will learn, things that you will hear. Some of this content is going to sound like it's just impossible to be true. As I've been learning about human trafficking for the past 6.5 to 7 years from the persons on this platform, I'm telling you, my mind is, I just find it difficult to comprehend how it is in the United States of America, in a nation like ours. We can put people on the moon. We can count the hairs on your head from thousands of miles away. We can send spaceships into orbit. We've got such vast technological power and reach, and yet we cannot protect our most vulnerable people. Something is wrong, and something has gone awry. And so tonight, as we talk about this subject, I want you to pay strict attention, and you're going to discover how you too can get involved. Let's welcome our esteemed panel on tonight. I want to get to our featured guest that's joined us, but I want to get to her last. I want to start with Jacqueline Alludo, who is the founder and CEO of NTZ No Trafficking Zone, our partner in human trafficking, and our courageous visionary with NTZ. Jacqueline, welcome back. You just got off a plane from Atlanta, you and Courtney, and we know that is a typical Jacqueline. You are always moving and about the cause, and we're grateful to have Jack. Give her a hand, won't you? Jacqueline Alludo. And then Courtney Litvak is a survivor leader with NTZ and an advocate. Both of them are specialists, and they live every day in the trenches doing this hard work. And I've learned so much from Jacqueline and from Courtney, and being in settings with them, not just here in the city, but around the state and around the nation. Jacqueline, you are responsible for our special guest being here. So let me allow you, please, to introduce who she is and why it's important that we have her here in Houston for this Empower Talk Live conversation.
Okay. Thank you so much for having us here, Bishop, and for everyone participating, and for Courtney being here. Dr. Stephanie Powell is a warrior in the anti-human trafficking movement, and she is using her voice and her strength to really make a difference, but to really talk about subjects that are really uncomfortable for certain people to talk about, and really talking about the truth. And one of the things that she is really, really passionate about, and which is really important, is that communities of color are being targeted. And that sometimes under the guise of that we're supposed to be helping vulnerable communities, we are really exploiting them. And so I'm very excited that she's here and that she took the time, because I know that you and her and other leaders across the nation are gonna make such an incredible difference. So Dr. Stephanie Powell, welcome.
Thank you so very much.
Absolutely. Dr. Powell, thank you for being here. And tell us where you're from and what you're doing here in Houston.
So I came all the way from Los Angeles, California, born and raised. I was just to give a little background on me, I was a Los Angeles police officer for 30 years. And I left as a sergeant, and I was running a vice unit. And it was from there that I really started to understand what human trafficking was, that the girls that I was seeing out there, we call it the blade or the track, on the prostitution tracks, weren't out there by choice. And so when I recognized that and recognized it as human trafficking, that it wasn't this thing that was only happening internationally, but that it was happening here. And then to come to find out that statistics being as high as 60% of victims of human trafficking across the nation are African American girls. And then to understand that the average age of entry is between 12 and 14. For African American girls, it's 11. So when I retired from LAPD, I ran and I became an executive director of a 40-year-old organization called Journey Out, and we assisted adult victims of human trafficking. So that's how I became involved, and that's why I'm so passionate, especially when I was working LAPD, to see that the girls that I was arresting looked just like me. And so how could I just stand by without doing anything? So that's where my passion comes from.
Wow, so you got to see it from the other side.
Yes.
As a law enforcement officer and working in Vice, but the crisis became your calling. It's interesting, you mentioned 60% of traffic victims in America are African American girls, and ages starting as young as 11 on average. Let's talk about that for just a moment, because that's probably startling some people to even hear that statistic. And because this is not common conversation, right? I doubt very seriously if anyone in our audience today had a conversation about the fact that 60% of those trafficking victims are African American girls. And I doubt there's no news story about that today or this week or last week. And in our churches, there are no bulletins and announcements, no red alerts that says that that's the case. How is it that this is happening and the larger public is completely disconnected from this reality and from this tragedy?
Well, part of the problem is when you Google human trafficking victims, it's not the 60% that you see. And so I often wondered, why is it that they're not showing the reality, or at the very least, showing a mixture of folks, right? And so when I think back on it, I often wonder is, if they show little girls that look like me, would you get the same empathy? Would you get the same push about ending it? And so I think that that's one of the issues. And I think also because there is this idea of who the human trafficking victim is as opposed to the reality, that's why we're having discussion tonight about certain laws that are coming into place.
Now, before we get to that, you mentioned something very interesting, that when we do see a story, typically it's not a reflection of the 60%. And that's a catch-22. Maybe you're right, maybe we wouldn't draw the same emotions and get the same empathy and sympathy. But on the other hand, African-American leaders and pastors and parents not seeing that as a reality are not then up in arms about it, trying to fight it and stop it. We don't feel like it's our cause. So that's kind of double jeopardy. And I know we're going to get to Courtney Livak's story in just a moment. She's not African-American, but she's advocating for all victims, right? And Jacqueline advocates for all victims. And Jacqueline, by the way, has been telling us this for a long time. And by the way, so when I met Jacqueline, I was not as involved with trafficking. You know, I was doing my little part here and there, a donation, you know, show up and speak and encourage at a graduation of some girls. But, you know, Jacqueline looked at me and said, where are the black churches? Like, where are the black pastors? She was very forthright about that. Not just the pastors, where are the black pastors? And I'm saying, well, why? She said, because did you not know that the majority of the children being trafficked are African American? I did not know that. And I assured her that most of my colleagues did not know that. I've been to every convention, every association, every fellowship meeting. I've done all that from across the country. That's not a part of the platform. There are no classes. There are no seminars on trafficking. And I had, after convincing her of that, then I said, well, why don't you teach me? Why don't you talk to me? Teach us, and why don't you talk to more pastors? And the movement is growing here ever since then. Jacqueline, how frustrating is it to you? You work as well on the track here, right? And you've been out there. You don't see people who look like us often in the fight, but you see the victims who are in this 60% that Dr. Powell is describing. And then you talk to those girls. Where is the disconnect in your mind?
I think there's quite a few disconnects. And not just with the black community, in the Hispanic community, in the indigenous community. Literally 4 years ago, the indigenous community didn't even have a database for missing children and women. They didn't even exist. They don't even have a voice. And so when you're talking about vulnerable communities or communities of color, the sad part is that we live in a nation that is still very racist. And we put more value on white people. And it is uncomfortable, it is an uncomfortable topic to talk about, but it really is the truth, because when you look at the communities that are Hispanic, black, and indigenous, you see just how the war on poverty is so profitable and how much exploitation is really happening. And that when their children go missing, they don't have the same resources as other communities, so they will not find their children or get their children off the track and blade. I also want to say that really goes for trailer parks for white children too that are being sold for crystal meth. Poverty is a vicious beast, and when people are poor or do not have the same education or resources, people discriminate against them. And so what we have to do is change the ideology of this nation, but also change our culture that we are one race and that we all matter, period, end of story. I could recover a girl who looks like Courtney or looks like Dr. Powell. I'm gonna love them the same, I'm gonna fight for them the same, I'm gonna advocate for them the same. And we all need to be like that, because every person and every child matters.
Well, because this is a $150 billion industry worldwide, globally, and over 37 billion, I think it is now, in the US. So this is big business. This is a lot of money changes hands. About facet of society. So possible? Why don't we have more leadership involved with changing and making the right sorts of laws? And you're going to talk to us today about laws that are being changed or created that makes trafficking and exploitation something that we cannot even prosecute if these laws continue to get passed. How is that happening in a nation as developed and as progressive as the United States of America? And after this, I want to hear Courtney's take on it, because she's been through some things, but to hear what you explain about these laws must make her pretty infuriated. Talk to us about that.
I'm sure it does make her infuriated, because the survivors that are out there, the girls that are out there, and let me just add too that it's not just teenage girls that are out there. There are women out there that are victims of trafficking, adult women. And when you look at the adult women, that a woman that might be 25, she's probably been in a life since she was 15. And so I know all of us in this community look at each other and go like, why doesn't anybody care? Is anybody paying attention? Without being political, sometimes it's a thing of following the money. Who's going to benefit from all of this at the end? It's like cannabis. Who benefits from it at the end of the day? So if we're talking about a business right now where it's illegal and you're making that much money, what's going to happen when that business becomes legal? You follow the money.
The profits explode, yes. Wow. So we're literally talking about, as you use the cannabis analogy, we're literally talking about industrious minds discovering the fact that, as we did with cannabis, we can turn this into a larger industry if it's legalized.
And with cannabis, you're talking about an object that you can smoke. With prostitution, you're talking about bodies and people you can buy.
And reuse.
And if you talk about marginalized people, it's going to be those bodies that are going to end up for sale. And I think that that's what people need to understand. We're talking about human beings, bodies that could be sold over and over and over again.
Yeah. Well, Courtney, when you hear about this, from your vantage point, give us your perspective. How does this make you feel?
Thank you, Bishop, and thank you, Dr. Powell and Jacqueline. I have a response to the previous conversation about talking about the legalization movement that is going on right now that should concern every single one of us, and underserved and marginalized communities are the highest at risk. And I want to talk a little bit, so I am infuriated, and I can talk directly from my own lived experience, my own survivor sisters, and many of them who are still in the life or even lost their lives. A good majority of them were absolutely young black girls or women, and I think this is so important you touched on it, who are now older, but they were first victimized either in their household, which so many people endure and go through, but we have to talk about the numbers because they're outstanding and they do stand apart from other communities who are more served. And that's why I really like underserved, because there's so much generational trauma and historical trauma that has been unhealed. Slavery only recently, historical slavery, because we know that slavery is alive and well in many different forms today in our country, but also in our world, very unfortunately. But that wasn't too long ago. And I do believe that this country and the leaders in it, the corrupt leaders, there are some wonderful people scattered throughout these different areas of influence. I was so fortunate to serve on the U.S. Advisory Council to combat trafficking with the White House under two very different administrations. But it was an honor to serve on the Underserved Populations Committee. You wouldn't believe what these feds would say to your face, and how they would speak specifically about marginalized communities and in support of the full pro-legalization of prostitution. No, it's the full legalization of modern-day slavery.
Wow.
Call it what it is. And should have everybody infuriated. So all the way from my time in the streets here in Houston, being trafficked throughout the whole state of Texas, and then across the entire country, I can tell you right now that unfortunately, we only have a growing number of underserved communities and individuals who are slipping through so many cracks. Because why? The systems that were put in place many years ago and the people who put them in place have not changed. A lot of people in power, I will tell you, they profit so much from poverty, from racism, from all of these things, and it's not all people. And that's another thing that's weaponized in modern time, is for us to all continually be divided and pit against one another, to think everybody is our, and so I was so encouraged to see the amount of people who were as infuriated as I was, to hear how so much of this is acceptable and in fact encouraged and a part of the systems that have been in place for decades, profiting from the exploitation of underserved populations specifically.
And we'll come to Jacqueline. Tell us about the laws specifically that are being changed for the full decriminalization of prostitution.
So so you have partial decriminalization. There's two conversations that are going on. There's partial decriminalization of prostitution, and that's more of the Swedish model or the Nordic model that you hear about, where the prostituted don't go to jail, but the sex buyers and the traffickers are held responsible. That's partial. And I think partial is something that I think more people could live with. It's the partial, if you had to live with either one. Full decriminalization means that nobody goes to jail. So that means the sex buyer, the prostituted, and the pimps. How it's being sold is that, and this is where the bait and switch situation happens, and this is why certain politicians and certain groups have locked on to full decriminalization, because all it says, they've hijacked the social justice, defund the police movement. Because what they say is, if you fully decriminalize prostitution, that means that people of color, LGBTQ, the marginalized, don't go to jail. But they don't say anything about the sex buyers and the pimps. So for full decriminalization, and I've read, it's been introduced in Hawaii already. I looked at the legislation in New York, and it says that legally, an adult, I would be able to have a pimp legally. So when you think about that for one moment, so what if I don't feel good? I'm gonna call my pimp and say, you know what, I don't feel good today. I think I need a day off. He's gonna give me, what, a sick day? No, he's gonna tell me get out there and work. And what's gonna happen if I don't work? So now what you've legalized, right, is gender-based violence, if we're talking about women, right? That's what you've done. And then if you try to prove that in a court of law that it's human trafficking, remember you have to have that force, fraud, or coercion. It's going to be my word against his. He's going to say, I hired him as my manager. But here's the other thing, and this is for our listeners and people in the audience. Think about this. Full decriminalization also means this. So you may live in a very nice neighborhood. We already are having problems with parties in Airbnbs. Somebody could rent an Airbnb for the weekend and have a brothel, and that would be legal.
Crazy.
So it seems so, but if people are only hearing the first part about who is not going to jail, they're not hearing the other part. You see me?
Yes.
That's the bait and switch.
Wow. Jacqueline,
So to add on what she's saying, when we did the press conference, what Children at Risk did was that there's more brothels in Houston than Starbucks.
Now slow down and say that one more time.
There are more brothels in Houston than there are Starbucks. And many of those brothels are next to schools where children play. And so I want to just elaborate on this, because when people think about profit and participation, they get confused. So I want to break down an example. Most of us know who Goldman Sachs is. Years ago, Goldman Sachs was having a little bit of trouble. They invested and owned 16% of a website called Backpage. Backpage was originally worth $25 million. When they decided to take over Craigslist business and buy and sell people, they generated up to over $500 million, which is a lot. That was keeping Goldman Sachs afloat. That's 16%. And so when you're talking about profit and participation, your Visa cards, your MasterCards, your American Express, every time you watch pornography, Pornhub, child sexual abuse material, they're making money. The social media platforms are making money. The people that we're putting in seats that are elected officials make money.
Slow down a little bit. Sometimes she's used to me saying, slow down. Because Jacqueline says things at rapid pace that people need to digest, and it's a lot. Go back a little bit. You could hear Mr. Thomas, that's a lot. Right.
Sorry.
That's okay. It's necessary. You're saying, what you're explaining is that when people go on porn sites, they use their credit cards.
Credit card.
Company is making money. So that's how the profits.
Right.
Go ahead.
So the credit card company is making money. The social internet, whether it's Verizon or Amazon, is making money. So when we talk about $150 billion annually, so that's a lot of people. Getting to this question, capitalism that are ruling our country. And that's why laws are not set.
Also rules government. Than a few people having a across the how to defund laws that oppress. As you okay, we've got to talk because the moment I heard instantly that we needed to connect and faith leaders interested and engaged.
Excited to be able to talk to you, and I did notice as soon as I started talking to you that you really listened. We were fighting a bill, SB 357 in California, and I really was trying to get the African American community engaged in that. And what that was loitering for the purposes of prostitution. And so what that meant was, you know how you'll see, you know, on a blade, you'll see the girls walking the streets, you'll see the sex buyers trying to buy in the community. Well, they wanted to repeal the penal code that said that what I just described would be illegal. It passed. So in California, you can drive down some of the prostitution tracks and you'll see the girls out there from young to old. You'll see the sex buyers. You'll see the pimps. That's legal. Well, see, that started to pave the way, because we already know what's going to happen next, is for full decriminalization. And that's what we're seeing across the country. In Oregon, they put it on the ballot. It ended up being defeated because some of the organizations got involved. And that's why we're here. Part of my plea tonight is for people to understand what full decriminalization really means. Because when you hear voices out there like the ACLU and some other ones that say that with prostitution being illegal, that it really is damaging to the black community because folks are going to jail. They're not telling the other part of how now it allows people to legally go into our communities and buy our women and girls. And so I don't know what I need to say to get the black community involved to understand, because I'm going to tell you right now, if it becomes legal, then we have a habit of reacting to stuff. And what I'm saying is we need to be proactive, so when these outsiders come into your community and tell you this is the best thing for you, if nothing else, when you don't know what you don't know what to ask.
Right.
But when you are educated, you know what to ask and you know how to push back, and then you start holding these same politicians accountable.
Yes, a good place to clap. So one of the things that I would suggest saying, as I listened to you with this a moment ago, the legalization or the full decriminalization of prostitution legalizes exploitation.
Yes.
It makes then the pimp or the trafficker synonymous to the slave master, because it was legal to own slaves. What are doing bodies of the vulnerable. So the victims, black, white, or brown, language we have to full decriminalization of prostitution becomes legalized slavery all over again.
To tell you the mindset, I was sitting on a panel, and I was the only one that looked like me on the panel, and they were talking about full decriminalization of prostitution. And a woman says, she says, well, it needs to be legal, fully legalized, because that will give black women autonomy over their bodies. After I gripped my pearls, took a deep breath, because how am I going to answer this and still, you know, sound intelligent? First of all, African American women, we already have autonomy over our bodies.
That's the first thing.
What you're telling me is that if this becomes legal, then I'm going to say, thank God, let me get out there and do that, because I could probably make more money doing it. No. And am I going to say to my daughter, do you want to be an attorney? Or you know prostitution is legal, why don't you get out there and do that? Are you going to say that to your daughter? So it also becomes the idea of this is kind of what we do anyway, so we might as well go ahead and make it. That's not what we do. That's not what we are as African American women of being. But what we need to do is fix the systems where now that becomes a choice. You want to do something? Fix the system. Fix the obstacles that cause us to be poor. Fix the obstacles that keep us from being.
Yes. Okay.
I had an example that I would love to give when we're talking about what people say full decriminalization is about, but what it actually would mean. Because I love how you touched on that. I love everything that you're sharing, Dr. Powell, because it's so powerful. When someone as passionate as you, who has as much experience and all of these expertise, you know what you're talking about. We see this on the front lines more as we continue. Y'all don't know that you have seen this in some way, shape, or form on the front lines, whether you know it or not. And if you can take away from this conversation real life things that in a real lifetime that you would feel empowered to recognize, wow, my eyes are open now. This has been all around us, especially in the city of Houston. But I want to give an example when actually someone from the National Center of Sexual Exploitation, who is a wonderful impact partner and based out of DC, but they're national, they really helped break down to me actually what this looked like, because they had a bill in Vermont that they were lobbying in order to pass this in Vermont first. So they try to sneak it in. If they felt so proud about this bill and, like you said, would go out and tell their own daughters that this is the move, that this is encourageable, that this is acceptable in any way, then why are they so sneaky about it? Why do they use language to make people, sounds like a lot of politicians we know, but a lot of other people, but I want to give a real life example. So this is how someone broke it down to me from the National Center, and this blew my mind, and because I myself was in the life, I was trafficked through a lot of legal fronts. Legal. But did that ever make it okay? No, the most horrific crimes and exploitation of men and women were taking place, hidden in plain sight, because that word legal was in front of the business. So sexually oriented businesses, that could be brothels, massage parlors, there shouldn't be, but strip clubs are the number one. So someone broke this down to me. This is what they're trying to pass in Vermont, but California and these other states absolutely are trying to sneak all this in. So an attorney broke it down for me. He said, in the little writing, right, because they got to, they're really not about standing 10 toes on this. They really want us to not understand what it means until it would pass and be too late. Because in the fine print, this is what it would say. And talking about getting autonomy back, and it's the exact opposite. Well, who inverts the exact opposite of everything good? The devil himself. This is pure freaking evil, nothing less than, nothing short of. And this is just to paint it for you how clear this is, that this would ever be acceptable. A brothel. I don't know if any of you have frequented a strip club or any of that. No condemnation, seriously. A lot until you know, you don't know. And we're completely human as well. But so say you walk into a business, if this bill would have passed, if we do full decrim. So if you've ever been in one of these establishments, and it was very hard, because I myself went through this for many years, you walk into these businesses, whatever sexually oriented business it would be called. And the first thing you see when you walk in, whether it's in front of the bar or something else, is a bunch of working people, working girls for the most part in these strip clubs, lined up in a line, in like an assembly line. So just imagine first walking into that. What, do you think we're standing there like, we're proud with our shoulders back? We're excited for work today? Hell no. HE double hockey sticks. We're in church. Sorry.
You're right.
Okay.
You're right.
We're going to talk about it. So imagine seeing this. Here's the thing. There's all different kind of people who frequent these businesses. You're not always going to meet evil people in these places. But for the most part, a lot of sex buyers, they're deviant, they're evil, and they're entitled to other human beings' bodies. So you see this lineup, and this is what this bill would have allowed. Say a really awful person comes in. Doesn't matter if they're convicted. Pedophile, people don't background check this. Unfortunately, victims of trafficking and people in the sexually oriented business come face to face with the most predators per capita than other citizens because they come to us. They come to us a lot of the time. They commit crimes against it, but they come to us, to these businesses, to fuel their evil. And then they carry it out and they pass it down through the generations. There's just such a vicious cycle of this. But say they come in, they're horrific. They're asking for the youngest girl possible. This is a real thing. You can walk into one of these businesses right now, so imagine if it's legalized, and say, I want someone with this size breast, and they don't say it like that, I want someone with this skin color, I want someone with this height, I want someone who looks like this, and I don't want someone who looks like you literally get to pick out exactly what the human being you're gonna rape looks like. Okay? You're in an assembly line. Say the girl sees this person. Maybe they've been assaulted by them before. Any number of reasons that could make that person want to say, you know what, I'm not comfortable to leave this line. If they pick me out and say, oh, I want to assault you for money, let's go upstairs. Like, it's kind of like that. It's horrific. Any way you dress it up, but say the girl's like, you know what, to her manager, the pimp, or whatever, because a lot of these managers of these establishments, they're pimps. They're traffickers themselves. And she says, I don't want to do it, I don't want to do it. Under this law, they could tell her, I don't give a crap what you want to do or who you want to do. Get up there and work. It's your job. When I heard that, what girls and what these people have, what we have to go through already without full decriminalization and this BS, you already have assaults happening every day. The little bit of autonomy that remains,
Gone.
oh my God, could you imagine? That broke my, I've been in that line. How dare they say that is something we would ever want, that would be empowering or help us for any community, but especially for already underserved and targeted communities.
So it says to the
Blew my
predator,
mind. It
you've
blew
got
my
to-
mind.
It says to the predator and to the pimp or the manager of the brothel, whomever that is, you've got legal protection to do this evil. And that is the most heinous thought I can't even express. Courtney, thank you for being so transparent, and thank you for being honest and courageous enough to share that on today. Malcolm?
So human trafficking is slavery of our time. I'm not going to say it's modern, because I hate putting a nice word in front of such a barbaric act. Human trafficking is slavery of our time. And even in Houston, we have certain deals, like the Sweet 16 deals for strip clubs. It's happening in Houston.
Look it
where
up.
certain things are allowed and grandfathered in because of money. And so when we're all here appalled, we should know what's happening in our own city. If you go into juvenile detention in Harris County, you're gonna meet 13, 14, 15-year-old girls, which oddly, the majority though, is Hispanic, who have been trafficked and trafficked through the strip clubs. And guess what happens? When they commit a crime under their trafficker and their trafficker bonds out, these girls are getting 10 to 20 years for committing a crime that they were forced to make a quota. And so when everybody's here appalled, the other thing that we have to look at is what is happening in our communities? What are we doing in the city of Houston to make sure that this doesn't happen on our track, on our blade, in strip clubs? And what are our elected officials doing? And why are elected officials still pushing policies like this?
Well, I want to come back to Stephanie on this because, as she mentioned, what state was it they got ahead of it, and because of organizations got involved, they stopped it?
Oregon.
In Oregon.
Oregon.
Yeah.
But it's coming up again, and guess what? The guy who put it on the ballot has a lot of money, and he's a sex tourist. So I guess he's thinking to himself, I don't know if he's thinking it, but I'm gonna think it for him. He's probably sitting there, why should I go to Brazil when if I can make it legal here in Oregon, I don't have to go anywhere. So it's gonna come back up again. Hawaii, New York, Vermont, that they're fighting it in Boston. We're keeping an eye on it in California because we already had that one bill passed. And when you talk about the brothels, when you talk about the brothels, you talk about a legal system and the illegal activity that goes on within a legal system. Because there'll be those that will say, well, if it becomes legal, then it will be safer. It's not going to be safer. What all you've done is legalize the trauma.
Right. Again, I go back to you're legalizing slavery, right? It is slavery, right? But to legalize slavery, that's to think about. How nice were the slave owners who had legal authority to be slave owners, right? They absolutely were not nice at all, right? They were cruel, mean, and immensely violent. And so we're encouraging the violence and legalizing it. I want to try to turn a corner here, and then we're going to ask questions, see if there are any questions from our audience. I think, Jacqueline, you mentioned to me something happening in Chicago as well when you were talking about Jesse Jackson's daughter. So is that akin to what we're talking about at all?
No, you go ahead.
I think Chicago and like California is you have certain cities and states that are mimicking this ideology and really pushing this agenda. And so you have to make sure that those elected officials know. And see, pastors really have a lot of power over a lot of these communities, especially black pastors. So we need you guys to educate these elected officials and say, hey, we understand you're getting pressure from your donors and you think that they have to keep you in your seat. But we're gonna mobilize and organize our people so that you cannot exploit them. And that's what Chicago is doing. They're taking on some of the ideologies of these other states.
And even though one might say, well, that's not happening in my state. Well, it's not happening right now. Look at cannabis. You know, it started off in just a few states. Now, it's one state right after another. The same thing is going to happen. And unless the statistics have changed, for human trafficking, Houston is the #1 city, and California is the #1 state. Because we get a lot of girls that are coming from our tracks that are coming in from Houston. So people may say, well, this would never happen in my state. As soon as those states start to fall, you're going to start to see a difference.
One of the things I learned through this education is how networked traffickers are across the country. It's not like, the traffickers in California are not connected to the traffickers in Texas. It's like gangs, right? The Bloods are connected wherever the Bloods are. The Crips are connected wherever the Crips are. And we have to really understand how complex that works. It is an industry. And so just like McDonald's is McDonald's across the nation, across the world, traffickers are just that organized and that sophisticated. And so if it's happening in one state, right, you have to understand that it's strategic. We're going to get it passed here and do it quietly. And while we're working on that, we'll be working on elected officials here. In other words, okay, let me give an example. So if you're in that business, in that industry, and you know you're going to need to pass laws in the next 3 years in this state, in this city, what do? You invest in the politicians you want to get elected, right? So you investing in who gets elected to those offices, they become dependent on your election, your campaign contributions, and now they are beholden to those who make the donations. But I was at your fundraiser. I gave you the largest contribution. We held it at such house. Now all of a sudden, those people are elected, and they are already under the thumbs of those who finance the campaigns. Are y'all hear what I'm trying to say? So because it is a long-term strategy, it's not an overnight decision. That's how sophisticated this stuff works, which is why also we got to learn how to finance our own people's campaigns and pick our own candidates and groom our own candidates who represent our values. Y'all talking back to me. That's a whole nother conversation. All right.
That's why we created the zones, no trafficking zones.
Yes, absolutely. And so this is important. I want to talk about public policy for just a minute, and then we'll try to, before let me be true to my word. Are there any questions from the audience yet? Anyone in the audience have a question or a comment you'd like to make? All right, yes. Step to the center, please, quickly. Bring the mic to the center. Bring the mic to the center.
Good evening. I do have a question. I spoke with Jennifer earlier about it, but I really wanted to know what is happening that maybe you can do something proactive through schools, educating, because schools, these traffickers, if they're starting at school, there needs to be something proactive to go on in schools programs. I know I was addressed by MD Anderson about vaping, because we're starting to see that. So if they're doing it with vaping, why can't we have something like that, an educational program to start in these elementary schools? I work with elementary kids, and I've seen them start doing things, and that's where it needs to be proactive, need to start there, because they carry it on to high school, and then they carry it on to the next level. So what's being done about that area?
So what we've done in Texas is no trafficking zone, created SB 1831, which is No Trafficking Zone School Act, which makes it a higher penalty to traffic school children, not just 1,000 zone campus, but through the cell phone, which is the most dangerous thing for a child to have. And basically, if you're trying to groom, lure, recruit, pick up the child from school who's being trafficked, because over 55% of survivors in the state of Texas were first approached either on their school campuses or by a peer. And we just got back from Atlanta, and we heard that it was 91% in their schools.
Yes,
and
the
so
whole state of Georgia.
now with the
91%
Congresswoman,
in the state of Georgia.
yes, which is why we had the Congresswoman carry it federally, because we know Epstein did it in Florida. We know it's happening in Vermont. And that's one of the biggest hunting grounds, because when you talk about high reward where people are gonna make a lot of money to buy and sell children, if there aren't harsh penalties in place, if there isn't a big risk to buy and sell children, well, they've studied the recruitment, the organized crimes, the gangs, the pimps, the networks. And so legislation on top of education is so important.
In California, we have AB 1227, and what it says is that human trafficking prevention has to be taught in the schools, in the middle and high school. But here's the problem, which is a great idea. Nobody can figure out who's going to teach it. Is it going to be the gym teacher, health teacher? But no money came with it.
With it, yes.
And that
yes.
was the problem. So I just tell other states that if you're going to do that, money's got to come with it. So there are curriculums out there for prevention, and that's what you need. And it does need to start and it can be appropriately taught in the grades, in the elementary level.
One thing I would love to add to that we've seen so much success for, because something I believe in is empowering the individual in each and every youth and child, because you're right, we have to be proactive and get ahead of this issue. If we don't get down the prevention pillar, we're just always going to be fighting this and chasing it as it continues to evolve. So how do we evolve? We put the power and empowerment and the knowledge and tools in the hands of the students and the youth who need it most for themselves and their peers. We empower them to not just have a no trafficking zone around themselves and their schools, but their fellow students, their peers, and to create that sense of community at a young age. First of all, that's something we're lacking in the school system in country. They took God out first. But let's talk about all the things our students are facing today that are only growing and increasingly worse. And that is something that we're so excited with NTZ students, that we have been partnering for years now with high school students, with different grade level students, and college students. Even recently at the University of St. Thomas have started their own podcast. They are so excited to get more empowered and knowledgeable of this issue and do something about it within their own community. So we're so encouraged that we're going to continue to build those networks with the students and their peers, leading them and being the world changers we know they are.
So, and I'm coming to the next question. Dr. Powell, you mentioned California has a law, passed a law that teachers have to be educated, that schools have to be, there has to be education about trafficking.
The students.
The students. That's something we need to work on in Texas, to where there could be a law where it's required for students to learn about.
There is a law.
But does the law say it's required?
There is a law where organizations or who the schools pick and the board, it's very hard though, because if one parent says that they don't want their child to be talked about trafficking, then it doesn't happen.
It shuts it down in the whole school.
And that's what's happening too in California.
so hard.
Yeah, it's a hard sell. It's kind of like nobody wants to talk about it.
That law really passed very in special sessions the last session.
So I think one of the things we can do is educate citizens about the law, right? Because most of us don't know that the law exists. So let's think about an educational and an awareness campaign. Let's get the law, break the law down, and do educational sessions. Next question.
Hi, Bishop.
How you doing, Dr. Peretta?
We tend to continue to run into each other for these
Absolutely.
challenges.
Always advocating.
I really have to appreciate what Jacqueline Aludo has done at the state level for the bill. It's very, very important. But what's more important are those that you have elected because I sit on an education governing board. I sit on the board at Houston Community College, and the first thing that I noticed when human trafficking was really put in my face a few years ago, we had a lecture by Dr. Nisi Hamilton at Houston Community College, because she said something to me that was shocking to me. She said, it's happening right here on your campus. So I said, well, I have to do something about that. The governing board can put in their bylaws, policies, procedures, rules, and regulations what can and cannot happen in terms of human trafficking. And when Jacqueline brought to me the no trafficking zone, that it existed at only a couple of the campuses, I have gone back to the governance table to add human trafficking as part of Title IX and sexual harassment at the board level, at the governance table. That is something that every school governing board needs to do. And between these two ladies, Dr. Nisi Hamilton and Jacqueline Aluda, if they had not explained to me what this looks like and what we could do, I would not have known how to execute it at the governance table. Now, I can tell you, administration kind of did this, and I kind of brought them back to it. So as chair of an audit committee, the audit committee is in control of risk management. Title IX is part of audit, and most people don't realize that. So if you have a governing board and they have an audit committee, they need to have a formal report on Title IX, sexual harassment, and human trafficking. Wow. And so I am working with my board so that all of our campuses can have the no trafficking zone. I think that is absolutely amazing. And congratulations on your bill passing.
Thank you so much.
Dr. Greta, I want to,
Yes.
I can't let you leave without an assignment.
Oh.
I mean, because Jacqueline has been excited about this connection with ACC. But what you
really,
just mentioned
your
is
passion.
the importance of the governing board, and thank you, I'm glad that you're on that board as well at ACC. But then there's Lone Star College, there is U of H downtown, I mean, all these community colleges.
I have a plan.
Yes, I would like to, I'm a person about assignments, I delegate for the good. If we could get United for Human Trafficking, partner with NTZ, have a conference with governing board chairs or the presidents of those, so this doesn't take 10 years.
Oh, it's easier than you think.
Yeah.
I'm actually on the national board of Association of Community College Trustees, and the chair of the national organization is from the Valley, and I'm having that conversation with her tomorrow.
Well, I think that these ladies ought to join you in helping to educate those leaders so that we can, and then what we need the community to do and the pastor to do is to back the movement, because all those board members are elected.
They are.
They are our elected officials. I said they are our elected officials. So they need to know that their constituents are behind the movement, not just a board member.
Yeah.
Right.
I just wanted to say thank you so much. When I met you at the press conference with Congressman Green.
At Worthing High School.
Yes. You were so passionate, but not just that, you weren't passionate for one day. You have stuck to your word. You've emailed me what's going on, what's happening. And so when we elect people, it's not just people doing lip service that's saying they care. Like this woman, she cares, she's taking a stand, but she's having courage and saying this is what has to happen. So I just want to say it's an honor to know you and just to kind of work alongside of you and figure out how we're going to do this together.
Oh, we're going to do it together. And for the curriculums, the state of Texas, the Texas Education Agency, has to approve or certify a curriculum. But once you do, I think there are 11 other states that will just automatically accept it.
Yes. Right.
But nobody tells you that. So if you have a human trafficking curriculum, you can submit it to the 11-page long document that TEA gives you to fill out. Fill the document out, because you have access with that curriculum across other states, and in every school in the state of Texas. There are 50 community colleges in this state.
Right.
If my chair, Rose Benavidez, does this, we'll do it in Texas, and then we take it to national in October, which is 1,200 community colleges and 6,500 trustees. That is my plan.
Oh, I love that plan. I'm with you with that plan.
And
Thank you for your
I'm
leadership.
an adjunct professor at community college in Los Angeles, and Trade Tech.
I know your board member.
Okay, and I'm also an adjunct at USC. But here's what I'm saying, is that I have students that are victims of human trafficking in that community college where I teach. And so it's not, the students are affected by it because some of my students are trafficked victims. So that, I think that needs to be told as well and understood to the public.
Well, the plan that I have is for, once it's on the governance table and once it's embedded in the policies and the Board of Governors or your trustees, their bylaws dictate that. Everything else flows from the bylaws. So once it's in the bylaws at our level, it has to go into the policies at the administration level.
Yeah.
But then it has to go to the police departments of your community college. They have to be trained.
Yes.
Because most of them have no clue. So they have to be trained. And when the governing board does not like what they see, trust and believe, that will change.
Yes. Yes.
So that's who you need. I know your trustees. I'll have to, give me the name. Can you text me the name of our college? Because I'll text your
Well,
trustees.
as soon as we have the close of this, y'all are going to exchange whatever y'all have to change, and because this is the way God connects people to people.
Thank you so much for coming tonight.
Thank you for your effort.
I text her last minute. This is how amazing she is.
Yeah.
I said, could you please come tonight? And she said, I'm going to try. And she showed up.
Well, she's that way, and then we can also take this to the multicultural Texas Multicultural Advocacy
The
Coalition.
Texas Multicultural Advocacy Coalition, which is an international group. And that's a really, as a matter of fact, I'm going to TED Talk Bishop, so he understands what that means.
Yes.
But that TMAC is designed for just issues
kind of thing
that
like this.
affect us all, and not just this group of people or that particular culture or this nationality. This affects us all.
Yes.
And we have really got to dig in our heels and make a way for these people to get out
Yes.
and go forward. So, and even in your community colleges, there's funding for them to go to school for free.
Yes.
Nobody ever tells them,
No.
but it exists for them.
Yeah.
And so we want to make sure that we don't just get them out. We get them out, we get them
get 'em-
trained, we get them a job, and we
And
get them a
empower them to
life.
go forward. Yes.
That's the pathway. That's what we have to do.
Yes. Awesome. Awesome. Any other question? Yes. Isn't this awesome?
This is wonderful, Bishop and Dr. Powell. We just met today in person, Jacqueline and Courtney. And I'm here today, Eileen Dawn. I'm a TEDx speaker myself, experience trainer and consultant on problem victimization, including trafficking. What I wanted to mention that, you mentioned about the school board, about having developed the training curriculum on human trafficking at the school level and involving training for the police department. That wasn't my question, but I wanted to mention that because I do provide training for law enforcement, such as NOLI, and for the police officers, as well as campus polices and law enforcement executives. So I'd love to connect to see how I can help connect, and just like Bishop said, the power of God and how we can do this together. What my question is today is, as you can see, I am from China originally, and you know that right now, I just put up just now, say, okay, DOJ said, okay, in 2020, the number of illicit massage businesses was around 10,000. But the network said it's about 13,500 right now. That's the network database around the country that they pull off the roadmaps. And there's also other database that's, the Allies Against Slavery in Texas, as well as in Louisiana. That's where they are funded. But my question is, because the major victims in the illicit massage businesses are mainly from South Asia, as you know, Korea and China. And me being from China, and my background is I used to volunteer and just do all the work in the background until the judge from the 280th court came to me and said, you know what, your ethnicity is not underrepresented, it's not represented at all, and you need to speak up for them. And so today I am the voice, and I am bridging the gap. And the gap that I'm bridging is, I think, Jack, you mentioned earlier, you said, years ago, the indigenous group that did not have the data. And that's what I'm encountering now. And the government says, okay, you want the money, you want the program, you want the policy, but there's no number for that. Yeah. So my question for y'all, since you're the expert in all the experience and everything, like how can we work this together? I love, again, Jacqueline said, this should not be like a political problem. It's not a national or international problem. This is a global issue. This is a nonpartisan issue. How can we resolve this together?
I'll back up.
So I can just speak for what we do. What happened is obviously the problem is so great, the corruption is great, the organized crime is great, is we broke human trafficking down into markets. Since it is a $150 billion business, there's so many different markets on to be trafficked. Sextortion, boys being trafficked, 30% of children are boys. Working with the indigenous community on and off the reservations, working with the schools, because when we would recover victims, they weren't graduating from school because they were afraid to go back to school because they were going to be bullied. And so what we did is, to create these zones, is we targeted the markets of human trafficking and really assessed how each community is being victimized and how each market is operating. And then how do we disrupt it and dismantle it? That's what No Trafficking Zone does. From laws to curriculums to training, we work alongside federal agencies, local agencies. We work with everyone because it's gonna take everyone to do this. But we are very intentional, and so what I would say for what you are all doing is, when we work with the indigenous communities, we started understanding what did they need. They needed a database. They needed a federal database that was recognized, that when their people go missing, that is important. And then to understand laws like Violence Against Women's Act that had to be reenacted, re-enabled, because if not, it would be legal to rape a woman, a child, murder them on the reservation, then walk right off and you would be fine. And so how we would do it is we would collaborate and work together and study the market of really what you're speaking about, and then how do we disrupt and dismantle it on many levels.
I was on I just recently went off the California Massage Therapy Council in California, and what they do, or what we did, was we monitored the massage schools. Because what was happening in the illicit massage establishments, they became a diploma mill. And so people would get these massage licenses, but they were in the illicit portion of it. And so we monitored those and got rid of those schools that became the mills. The other thing that we did was the inspectors that were coming in, and then again training law enforcement of what to do when you went into those establishments to look for those credentials, or when the city that comes in, the city that was doing the permits in order to shut these places down. The problem is, as you know, is that somebody opens up something in one part of town, that same owner opens up something in another part of town. So again, it goes back to holding the city responsible for shutting down those places, but at the same time, and I know I'm speaking to the choir when it comes to you, is that people need to understand that people that work in those illicit massage establishments don't choose to be there, because a lot of times people think that they just want to be there, and they don't speak the language, so they become invisible. So thank you for what you're doing in your awareness.
And I think too, this piece that Fred and I mentioned with getting TMAC involved, the Texas Multicultural Advocacy Coalition, we have leading Chinese business people and legal people and elected officials who are part of that, so then they'll be able to understand, because they understand what's happening in the South Asian community, and they'll be able to also help with pushing policies in the state and local and federal that will impact and influence what you're speaking of.
Thank you, Bishop, and thank you all the panelists. I want to sort of, comment on that. I think it's really, really good information that you talk about the multidisciplinary collaboration, because that's the only way we can resolve this issue and end it. I think it's really important that you said, Dr. Powell talked about ending this, sort of thinking of this as an organized crime. Like you said, we can close the business on the same day, and the same, maybe a different owner, maybe even the same owner open another business at the same premises. So, how do we counter this, thinking as a businessman to counter this crime? I think this is definitely something that we would like to work together. And I want to piggyback on Jackie's answer about the policies in the database. I definitely need your help with the database. I think a national database on these numbers will be really essential, and love to collaborate on that. Regarding the culture, Bishop mentioned about the multicultural center and everything, definitely be interested. But I wanted to just kind of talk about the joke a little bit. Like in China, for instance, there are over 50 ethnicities. So last year I was working in Minnesota, and over there, the Midwest, Wisconsin, Minnesota, there's a large Hmong community. And I have people coming to me with because I'm also a linguist. I work with ISDOJ on cases, human trafficking, money laundering, even U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services. Back in the days, I'm like, wow, a turtle is over $10,000. But they were like, yeah, that's how they launder the money. Where do you think they launder the money? I work with SEC and everything. So if you look at the large picture, this is all coming together. So how can we, combat this trafficking together? So I think this is really essential that we combat the trafficking on a business level, thinking as a businessman. And I would love to, work on that. But from the cultural aspect, there are over 50 different ethnicities in China. So the Hmong community is a large community in Wisconsin and Minnesota, and people ask me is this a language? I'm like, well, this is a completely different ethnicity. Wow. So there's the Hmong community that live across the border between Vietnam and China. So there's Chinese Hmong and the Vietnamese Hmong. So for the sake of that, I took a picture of their costume. You sometimes see the ethnicity wearing all those beautiful costumes. So apparently they even have different costumes, but they all speak different languages. But most importantly, they have slightly of the different culture. And that's where I fall into place to provide the training on the culturally specific and linguistically sensitive training for the law enforcement victim services as well as the communities. But I wanted to talk about the communities because the communities, I have the victim services coming to me. They were like, I am so frustrated. Wow. I feel like I'm underappreciated. Because again, it's back to the number. They were like, well, why are you talking about this? There's no number, just like what you are talking about. Yeah, I don't see it because I don't know it. But then for the Asian culture, it's even worse because it's all sheltered. So that's what we talk about, the first-gen immigrants and the second-gen immigrants. For instance, I'm the first-gen. I have a child that's the second-gen. And so talking about, we have, it's really great. Our children are understanding the consent, but consent is not even a definition in China because we don't consent. A woman is supposed to please the man, whether they are a married partner or now, intimate partner. What I'm talking about is this a whole level of the training of the culture.
Wow, that's interesting. And so I know that Jacqueline looking forward to talking with you more and collaborating with you more, and you collaborating with the NTC. You're the kind of person that NCC is looking to connect with, so we can broaden the impact. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Bishop.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
Good evening, everyone.
Hello.
I've been in at least 3 major industries, and I spent over 30 years in education. I applaud what you're doing. Please don't be discouraged because education legislation, Dr. Powell, Jacqueline Ludo, a lot of what happens, because I was in education, happens in plain sight. But the teachers themselves, they don't know what to look for and they cannot identify it. So what I'm saying to you is a comment, it's not a question. Do not be discouraged. Every time you do one of these, you're educating someone. And I'm hoping that it spreads and that you continue.
Thank you.
So to that
Thank
point, thank you, Deborah, for that. The state law of California mandates that students be educated. Is there a law that mandates in Texas or wherever else that mandates that teachers and school administrators be educated? Is it mandated by law?
In Texas, yes.
There is a law that mandates that teachers and school operators be educated on trafficking.
It does. It does for our law enforcement, but like there's no specific group. It's different groups. So it just depends on that kind of education. But yeah, I think it's a couple hours that each administration and teacher, Texas
Has to
passed
take.
a law. Yeah.
Okay. And I'm curious about, I think that's something to look into. How effective is that? How effectively is it being implemented or not? Because if teachers are not really being trained to know what to look for, as she just expressed, that could be a big issue.
I would just like to say, and I'll say it quickly, the issue is that different schools in different communities, and some teachers know exactly what's happening, but they're afraid of the gangs. They're afraid of the organized crime that is running their streets, and so they do not have any power. Also, when they're calling law enforcement, there really is a barrier and a fear with law enforcement. And so when we're giving those trainings, you have to really understand those cultures and those communities and the barriers that they have, because they're going to be different. Okay. And the last thing that I'd like to say is that I want to see our state do is working with so many victims. One of the is because for accountability, it went to acknowledge what was happening, and then they didn't want to admit it and they didn't understand it, is we have to create curriculums for children. We do this, NTZ does it, where if you're being trafficked and you outcry and you don't want to go back to school, or you still want to graduate, walk in your graduation, go to your prom, we need to create special curriculums for those kids so that they can graduate. Because what happens to the students is they don't even get their GEDs because they're so traumatized.
Wow, wow. Okay, this has been thoroughly informative. I know that our time is up for tonight, but I am so appreciative. I know the audience as well. Let me give you each just a 1-minute wrap-up closing statement, and then we will talk about what we can do, because all of us have to stay connected to these minds so that we can make a difference. Courtney?
Thank you, Bishop. I think there's been a lot of really important information, and thank you so much for everybody's questions, because seeing just the enthusiasm for more and more people to connect with one another and collaborate, I completely agree, and we talked about that today in Atlanta, about a multidisciplinary approach and how important that is. But also, going back to something that I had talked about, one of the things I really feel strongly to remind people about is from the victims' perspective, especially when they're still in the life of trafficking, and that can look many different ways. There's so many different ways you can be trafficked, unfortunately. They do not identify as victims. So there can be all these programs. And I speak from experience, and like I said, I served at the federal level, and I've done a lot of work across the country I'm so grateful for, but just taking myself back to that time and the people we advocate for and who I've mentored and spoke with, all of that's wonderful, but so much of that will never even reach the people that it's meant to reach and serve. And they don't even know, and I love that this was spoken about and touched on by multiple people, that people aren't even aware of the tools and services there for them, whether it is help with tuition or whether it's programs and victim services. So it's also empowering that individual and teaching that in a preventative way where that's a part of our education system so that if they're ever approached, one, hopefully they will never have to be fully lured into the life of trafficking, but also to someone who can identify with what's happened or happening to them, that there's so many services and people like this out there who will just listen to them and meet them right where they're at.
Yes.
You know.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Closing statement, Jacqueline?
I would just like to ask everyone, first of all, I'd like to thank Jennifer, who is an advocate at the Landing and community outreach, and is incredible. I get to work with her a lot. United Against Human Trafficking, everyone that spoke, who just has so much passion. When we're talking about corruption and just all these things or a broken system, communities that are really struggling, we do have to get to the root issues and problems of what's happening. And we have to do that because we have to give people other options. What kind of country do we live in where the option is to sell yourself to feed your child, or sell yourself because that is your only option? That is unacceptable. And so we have to get to those root causes and why. And then I would like to ask, like Dr. Peretta coming and being so passionate, that is a community leader. We need community leaders to form a committee and a council. I would like to ask you two to partner on this so that you guys can use your strength as the community leaders to go to the elected officials together, to go to the communities and to go to the broken systems, because it's really gonna be you guys that are gonna have the strength and power to speak for the people and are not going to be motivated by money. You're gonna be motivated by the principles and humanity. That's what I'd like to close. And thank you, Dr. Powell, for coming in.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. And just to echo what you were saying, I would like to see the Black churches get involved to make aware of our communities what is going on. I also ask that everyone that's in here and that is watching, that you share what you saw today. Because once you've seen it, you can never say that you didn't see it, and you're going to want to do something about it. Yeah. And that's what I would like to leave with you today.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Give these ladies a hand, please. Give them a hand. And we appreciate each of you being here. I know that Bishop Livingston is here as well. He's involved. I know that Pastor Billy Williams is involved. He sent his ministerial representative as well. And we got pastors across the country who are chiming in via social media, and some local pastors who couldn't leave their ministry, but they are tuning in tonight. I think that, yes, I accept the challenge.
You have NTZ Faith.
Yes, I think it's important that we engage the Black church, and that means getting pastors connected to NTZ Faith and being able to hold conferences and seminars and getting NTZ Faith on platforms. I think that what really we need to do is get a team like this. And this summer, from June to August, the National Baptist Conventions are going to be meeting. There are 4 of those. And then the Pentecostals are meeting. I mean, there are all these church gatherings that are happening and meetings that are happening. And on none of those agendas that I'm aware of is a forum on human trafficking. I think we need to develop a deck and put this presentation on the road so that presidents and leaders of those organizations will know that this is available and is necessary.
And don't forget our boys. You know,
Yes.
we've done a great job of really teaching our girls how not to become the victims. We really need to teach our boys how not to become the predators. We really need to teach our boys.
Yes.
That's what we really need to do as well.
Yeah. And so then a movement amongst the boys and the men, right? Not to be biased and not to be predators. And so new church curriculum for men's ministry and for youth ministry that educates people on respect for other people's bodies, respect for their own bodies, and not to see people as objects, because the objectification of people is one of the major issues. So we've got a number of things that we know we can do, and I'm looking forward to taking further actions. I think to your challenge and assignment, Jacqueline, you've given to Dr. Prieta and I, Prieta, we need to organize a community leaders human trafficking forum, and then have Jacqueline and others to come in and speak to those. Let's get 40 leaders in the room, Dr. Prieta. Let's get 40 community leaders in the room and make that a forum and educate. Turn it on for kids.
It's easy. I think that's easy to do. I offered to host a forum last year at Le Brunch in Blue, because there were 150 people in the room, and they were mostly organizations that were doing the work, but not really working in lockstep. And so I offered to host at one of the community college campuses. And so we will definitely do that. But for those of you who have a training document, you need to put that document into the TEA for a credential.
So what's going to happen, Dr. Prieta, is Jacqueline's going to give you the document. You can show her how to walk through that process of getting it submitted to TEA.
And it's a heartache.
Yeah,
they make it a heartache for a reason. That's why it's 11 pages long. Yeah. So you get tired by page 5. But get it done, because it opens the door and allows you to be a trainer and take your product to every school district in the state of Texas and several other states. And you need to do that.
I think it would be good, too, helpful even politically speaking, if that curriculum is a collaboration, and if it's endorsed by a few different partners in the anti-trafficking movement, because we do know TEA is very political. We do know TEA is very political, right? But in order to get this passed the first time, I think we got to be smart and strategic. But I think we have the kind of people that are already at the table working on this to get something done, and we're excited about it. I thank God for this opportunity, and I know that we're going to engage pastors, Bishop Livingston, and we'll have to get a group of pastors and do the same thing and make sure that we're advocating for those who are advocating for us. And remember this, that trafficking is not something that's happening someplace else. It's happening next to you. And anything from our friend from United Human Against Trafficking, it just seems that they should say something, shouldn't they, Jacqueline? Yes. And Jennifer, anything, either of you before we close, we want to respect you all. Yes.
Yeah, well, first of all, honored to be here. I'm Ken Henry, Director of Collaboration and Strategy at United Against Human Trafficking. We just had a huge summit, so today that we do annually with HPD, and it was great. It was powerful, and part of that is because there, what you guys talked about, especially with Dr. Powell, with that major need of collaboration and communication between law enforcement and service providers, right? And then you see that across the line with everybody. We all are here for one mission, and that's to eradicate human trafficking. Whether you're faith-based, non-faith-based, whether you're law enforcement, social services, but you gotta respect everybody's lane. And that's the thing. So I think the whole thing is a spirit of humility that I see, and we're doing a lot of things. I mean, there's a lot of, our coalition has about 60 different entities where there's a mixture of all those, faith-based, and now we have a lot of non-faith-based, because for me that makes no sense to only have nonprofits on there when you're talking about economic empowerment. You need businesses that can give some of those opportunities and jobs and internships, things of that nature. And we've actually wrote some legislation recently that we've already put into the Texas Attorney General's office to give businesses, small and large, tax incentives if they would hire victims of human trafficking and if they would declare themselves as a zero tolerance for human trafficking and put it in policy, in writing, right? So it's those kind of things that we got to take with working together consistently. But everything you heard on the stage, I think is great. And I want to tell you, this doctor right here is truthful about her word, because I was at the Late Blue Luncheon. It's where I met her. I just had one of my famous hats on. It's on the seat right now. She didn't recognize me. But she did come up to me and talk about that. about putting a conference on and working together to do that, and with Dr. Niecy Hamilton, who's also in our coalition, Annaline, who's on our coalition. So when I come here, I see this, and I know Jacqueline and I have been trying to connect forever. You know, it just takes what I talked about today, intentionality. We all are busy, right? We're all in our day-to-day, but I want to remind folks all the time, like as we sit here today and talk about this important matter, and I commend you, especially as a man of faith, to bring this into your house and among your people. But remember, as we have the luxury to sit here and discuss this and theorize, at this very moment, people are being raped, people are being beaten, and they're being psychologically damaged and affected forever. So when you hear this, like Dr. Paul said, see it, because you can't unsee it. But what are you going to do after you leave here? Don't let this fall on deaf ears, and don't let it wait till it affects you, your household, or someone you care about. So connect with the people that are here. Follow up. You don't have to be a professional in human trafficking. You can be a retiree. You can be a stay-at-home mom. You can be a school teacher. You just connect with the folks, but everybody has a power. And we have to start working together, because traffickers, as Bishop said, they're working closely together all across this nation. So we need to be just as tight. And lastly, I want to say we do have the National Black Faith Coalition that we started. It wasn't supposed to be national, in our mind at least. We started when I was in LA working in the movement because of this lack of black organizations. I'm one of the founders of the Compton, California Task Force, and the statistics Dr. Powell talked about is what we were getting from law enforcement, because we worked very closely with them. But there was no black representation. So we created that, but then we realized, well, this is beautiful. We have a lot of help from faith-based, but it's not black faith-based. And it's not matching up with the numbers. So if more blacks are being affected, we need more blacks involved. So we appealed and walked into churches and got meetings with pastors and their leadership, and we just did pretty much this, and gave them the stats, and gave them the real deal, and from that, it grew to the National Black Faith Base. So I think even that, connecting with what NTZ Zone and all that, it doesn't make sense to reinvent wheels, right? Get together, work together, because there's always a niche and there's always a specialty, and we just have to identify that and do it. So thank you all for having us.
Thank you very much. Jennifer?
I hope you don't mind. I'm going to sit. It kind of hurt my knee. I'm sorry. I'm a youth advocate outreach specialist with The Landing, and I just want to keep mentioning that. I know they said quite a few times, but education is key. I think getting educated, go to the trainings. If you want somebody to come train at your church, train at the schools. We are trying so hard to get into the schools. There are a lot of barriers that we're running into, but we keep trying to jump over them, and we're finding ways. So if y'all have connections to get into the schools or church groups, businesses, please let us know. We're trying so hard. And if we can't speak directly to the kids, we'll start with the parents. If we can't speak to the parents, we'll start with the staff, the faculty. We have curriculum for all the groups. And so we just need y'all's help with trying to get into that. And we, with The Landing, we have 3 programs. I mentioned it to a few of y'all earlier. We have a drop-in center. We're located right on Bissonnette. If y'all know anything about Bissonnette, that's where trafficking is happening, right? So we have a safe place there for them to come. They can come and they can get food from us. We serve them hot meals. We have clothing, hygiene items. We even have beds if they haven't slept in a while. They can come in, get some services. That doesn't mean that they have to leave the life at that point, because it's their choice. So we are just there for them to have a safe space, and when they decide, hey, I'm ready to leave the life, we're there for them. We're helping them find housing. We're helping them get through school. We have a program they can go through where they get a scholarship after they graduate, and we're celebrating them. We also have our outreach program. We're going out onto Bissonnette. We're coming with drinks, food, little things to help them, but also being careful, because we're not trying to get them in trouble. We're not trying to get us in trouble, but we're saying, hey, here's some snacks, here's some clothing. If y'all need a safe place to come, we're right here on Bissonnette. Here's our address. Come on over. We'll feed you. We'll clothe you. And we have our youth advocate program, which I'm a part of. So we work with the kiddos, wherever the kids are. If they're in a foster home, if they're in juvenile, we're going to them. If they're going to court and they have to stand before the judge, we're standing before the judge with them and advocating for them. So.
Thank you.
This has been amazing. Thank you all so very much. Thank you all for tuning in to this critical conversation of Empower Talk Live. And remember this, when you know about it, you got to be about it. James Dixon, God bless you. Peace and power.